fun. It's like you want to do things that make you feel alive, and the things that make you feel alive are the things that make you a little uncomfortable. And there's always new levels of that. And to me, communicating in front of, like, this is a good opportunity to learn for me. So
yeah, this is a cool space. This is cool. We're good. All right, we are episode 3, Higher Human Performance Podcast, and I've got Ryan, who we go way back, but we kind of, you went your separate way, I went my separate way. You're a firefighter. We knew each other from college a little bit, working in the bars. And when I think about this podcast and this opportunity to connect with people, you're somebody that came to mind, because I know you live a very higher level thinking, higher consciousness, a mindfulness existence. You are all about being curious and Shoshin, which I love. So I appreciate you coming on today, man, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've always enjoyed your company, your energy, and reconnecting with you probably 2 years ago. My friend Gordon Berry told me about you.
Yeah.
He goes, dude, you're going to love this guy, Brandon. He's into movement and learning. And so I came and saw you again. It'd been years, probably 15, 16 years.
Wow, that's crazy, man.
And in 1 hour with you, I learned enough for a year. So yeah, you sent me home with a lot of nuggets and a lot of teachers. And I appreciate your brain and who you are. Yeah, you're an amazing guy, man.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Walk me, because I don't necessarily know your story. Maloney's in college. Right? We both worked there for a little bit. But then, did you go right into firefighting? Did you go from school to firefighting? Did you kind of walk me through your path?
Yeah, I sort of got lucky. There was a mass hiring happening, so I got hired by 2 departments within 2 years. I think I was 21 when I started bartending. Did it for 2 years, and I was going to the fire science program at the time, but meeting guys, doing some ride-alongs, and yeah, I took my first test with a small department, got hired, and they put me through a bigger department, Phoenix's Academy, and that helped me out to meet guys and to prove myself in there. And I was 23 when I got hired, and it's been 16 years, and feels like 2.
Yeah.
So
are you almost able to retire?
If I wanted to, 4 years, I could have a pension. But
that's pretty cool. Do you see yourself continuing to do what you're doing? Do you want to do different things? Like, where do you see that going?
Let's see. Well, a lot's happened in the last year for the planet.
Yeah.
So the landscape's pretty unpredictable. So a lot of the things I was considering and still consider are a little further off in the distance in my brain, and I consider right now more internal goals and thinking, which I think has been a part of my evolutionary process too. Is don't try to prepare yourself too much for what the landscape is going to look like, or don't build too many external goals. When you don't know what the actual landscape is going to look like, it's pretty obvious to everyone right now that we can't really tell.
Yeah.
Probably more so than ever. Politically, there's a lot of shifting that's going to happen, and I think that brings on a lot of excitement, and it sort of stimulates that courage button inside of me, and it makes me think like we are living inside of an incredible paradigm. Mm-hmm. We'll look back in probably 10, 20 years and say that this was a crucial point in human history, and how did you show up? And so I read a lot of books about Stoicism, and I read a lot of books on Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, and I like to see how individuals existentially showed up throughout time, and I like to then bring that into myself and go, okay, how am I showing up today at work when things get strange or weird, and how can I be more present, more humble, more patient, more kind, get more of a beginner's mind, more openness. And I don't know if I'll do 5 years with the fire department, 10 more years. It's sort of going to depend on a lot of external factors. But in the meantime, right now, I'm learning a lot. I'm reading a ton of books. I'm watching a lot of lectures. I'm traveling. I'm spending a lot of time in nature. I do a lot of introspection, just trying to drop into being more present to the here and now, and inner engineering, as Sadhguru would say.
Yeah.
And I think those are the things my mind has shifted to, not the external world, like I need to build this or be that, necessary, like a position, to have a label. Now I'm like, no, who am I as a human being? how do I think, how do I treat people. So it's interesting to try to communicate that, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I love it, man. So there's a lot that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to break that down a little bit more, do you feel like a big piece that you can provide is just connecting with people, like in your job as a firefighter, like being able to connect with a person, look them in the eye, all of these things.
Right.
Is that a way you can inject that
Absolutely.
that energy into the world?
Even the people you work with,
Yep.
they're human beings that have families and kids, and just trying to take account for what already is that's going right and how beautiful my life already is, and to show up every day to work and just to the grocery store or to anywhere that you go in life and to be present, it sort of affords you new opportunities to learn and to grow and to have an impact. And I think as I develop my own consciousness and start to learn about what the most important variables are while I'm here, it's like, how did I show up every day? It's not the idea of success in the external world that we've been taught to think. It's about, how did I feel? Did I have joy while I was alive? Was I actually present for those experiences I had when I was riding around on a fire truck? Or was I just in my head the whole time thinking about what I could be doing in the future, or that I wasn't doing enough? So a lot of times I just try to drop into the present moment, and that's not something that we sort of praise in our culture, but it's definitely got me hooked right now.
Yeah.
And it does afford me these beautiful new interactions and relationships and conversations and lessons, and I find more meaning in that than I do, planning for this big, huge future where I think I can impact 1 billion people on the planet. And it's like, I think it starts on the micro level. And, a lot of times I think, like when I'm sitting at home and I open a book, I take a few moments and I think of how grateful I am for the opportunity. Like for all of human history, how many people had food, shelter, water, security, all the hierarchy of needs met, safety, and this ability to just read, maybe the words of somebody that died 1,000 years ago, and to then upgrade and think a little differently and to travel through time and space by reading a book. And those are beautiful ways of, it actually brings me joy just to take account for that. And then I feel good. My vibration shifts. I feel like I'm healthier, and that leads into my reading process being a little bit more available. Instead of me not really comprehending what I'm reading, I'm actually taking it in and thinking about how meaningful this piece is that I'm reading, which allows me to learn a little quicker and maybe take it in and change my perceptual field, which then allows me to then change a conversation that I might have with you the next day. So I don't know. It sounds crazy, but that's how I think. I think about thinking a lot, and I think about how I can think a little better. And a lot of times I think I just want to be a little bit more present for my life and be more lucid in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, man. So much, I think that's mindfulness, right? That's this basis of mindfulness is being grateful for the current moment.
Yep.
And being able to tap into it, whatever you're doing, right? It's like, and there's so many different directions you can take that, but I think at its base, it's being happy for what you have rather than what you don't have, or you're upset with what you don't have, right? And that is the moment. That's this interaction. And it's funny you say that, because when we reconnected, that was the one thing that really resonated with me with you, was that energy of you, of how you made me feel, and this is just is you, that you cared about the moment, right? That you were very there, and that's a special quality that I think not a lot of people possess. So you think about what you're doing, you gave me that, right? And you're probably doing that with most people you interact, maybe all of them. And if more people were more aware of that, we would have we'd have a better consciousness. We'd have a better world, I think. So it's really cool to hear that. How did you get there, right? So I mean, that's a piece of this podcast. It's Higher Human, to me, represents connecting with people that have embraced growth. And in my growth, my personal growth, the mindfulness, meditation, beginner's mind is a huge piece. It just makes sense to me. How did you end up there? So go back, you're 23, you got hired on the fire department, right? Were you a very different man at that point in your life? I mean, we all were, but walk me through, like, how, from there to now, what led you there?
Well, I appreciate your kind words, of course. And when I met you again, I was pretty impressed, with just the fact that I was standing in front of somebody who cared a lot about learning, and you were very present for me, and I just showed up to your doorstep, and you spent a whole hour and a half with me.
Yep.
Teaching me. So I appreciate who you are and how you think too, man.
Yep.
And I'm going to say right off the bat that I am not good at this mindfulness stuff. I am a beginner.
Yep.
I'm practicing. It's all a practice. And I think that's something I always try to remind myself of and others is like, just take it easy. Your mind could be busy at night when you're trying to go to bed, and don't try to fight it. Don't try to resist it. Just try to observe it and pay attention to it, and just laugh at it almost, and take the stress off of all of it. And so that's part of my developmental process, is to not take it too seriously, and to not think that I'm not good enough, or to not think that I need to be somewhere, and to just appreciate the idea that I'm alive in the middle of time and space and having an experience. And that type of thinking for me came from so many different teachers and from so many different experiences, and I can go back with you and sort of stage out a couple processes that I can tell were major shifts that helped me to get to huge shifts for me. Like, there was a point in my life about 30 years old, I'm 39 right now, and floating was a huge part of it. I had never even heard of meditation, to be honest, and I drove to a float center hearing it on a podcast. And I went with just an openness and a curiosity, and I didn't know that it was even going to be something profound. And I got in that float tank, and it was probably the first time in my life that I spent an hour with myself, with no distraction, nowhere to go, couldn't look at my smartphone, and I wanted to stick it out as like I paid money for this, I showed up. And my mind was pretty busy in there, and I started to see that internal dialogue, that narrative structure for the first time, and I felt the need to almost get out of that float tank. And I sort of got obsessed with the floating that day. I said, I need to go back there. So I got out, I did some journaling, and I remember writing some things down about how my belief systems worked. And I had never even took the time till I was about 29 years old to do any self-reflection. I think Had
you been journaling prior to that?
None.
You just decided after that I need to
write
these things
journaling,
down.
no self-reflection, no meditation, no mindfulness, no awareness, really. I think I was just on autopilot, and I think that's very common for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it's a bad thing. It's just a part of the human experience where you're born out of a birth canal. You're conditioned to think a certain way based on your culture. You come up through the school system, everybody's telling you how to think, and pretty soon you've got this idea of how the world works. And that's not a bad thing. It's just not the truth about the nature of reality and who we are. So the floating was one of the big moments where I actually started to pay attention to what I was paying attention to, and to even have a curiosity and a wonder for consciousness. Like, what is this? And so I went back, and I think my third float, I had a really incredible, just an observative experience where I truly separated myself from the narrative. I wasn't identified with it anymore, and that was huge. And I thought I was the only person in history at that moment, because I hadn't read a book in years at that point in time.
So when you say that, back up a bit, break that down, because I think I understand, but for people that maybe, like, how would you explain that a little bit more?
Which part? The part where I started to observe that. It's an interesting thing. And so I didn't have a language for it. I think I have more of an ability to put language to this process now, but at the time, it was literally like I saw my thoughts, right? Yeah. And I could see that they weren't real, that they weren't exactly matching up with the nature of what's really going on. It was more of a program running. So it's a software program, if you wanted to compare it to computer.
From your experiences, your conditioning.
Yeah, just software running, a bunch of different narratives and beliefs and stories about myself and about the world that had been handed to me. And they're not necessarily negative stories. It's just some are disempowering, some aren't true, some are weak. And so I started to just see that process happen, and I could start to go, oh my God, I can actually change my own operating system. I can change my software program. I can change the story about myself and about the world. And so can everybody else. And so when I came out of those experiences, I started writing, and I started also reading and doing some research and finding all kinds of incredible teachers and people that had died years before, some alive now, and many others in between that had written about the subject matter and people like Carl Jung with depth psychology, people like Stanislav Grof, who did holotropic breathing. You start getting into Terence McKenna's and the esoteric psychonauts and the people that really explored consciousness. And that became really, that's my passion, is to like, oh my God, this is interesting. I haven't thought about thinking my whole life. And now all of a sudden I had this radical floating experience along with podcasts and reading. And so I'm taking on a whole bunch of new perceptual shifts all at once. And I think I could start to build the way I wanted to think. And I think you're doing that, and a lot of people are doing that now, and probably more so than ever earlier on too, because we have access to so many different teachers and ways of thinking and different modalities, tools and techniques. And but when you ask me how I got to this stage, floating was just one of the catalysts. Plant medicines, I stumbled upon some things that in short periods of time just really threw all of my operating system into the garbage and showed me that there was a huge blank slate, and that I could see that the boundaries were a little bit less clear, and that I could start to perceive reality a little more openly and not as limited and not as offended and not as fearful of the unknown. I could start to see that the great unknown and the great mystery of life is the beauty of it. Instead of clinging to what I thought I knew about it and trying to structure it really hard, I actually began to be more open and more interested in exploring more about it and learning more about it, and just seeing that nature is an incredible mystery that needs to be explored and understood, just to find out more about it, not to like see that there's an end-all understanding about the whole thing. It's more but just to see how interesting it becomes as you explore.
Yeah.
And so my brain and the world are not separate either. I'm perceiving reality, and I'm an individual, and you're perceiving reality, and you're an individual. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, that we both have a different reality tunnel that we're looking through. How can we now exchange cliff notes and learn from one another and enjoy the process along the way, and see that it's beautiful to meet other people that think differently, not bad. It's actually the beauty of life. So anyway, of that, hopefully that answers some of your questions.
No, I mean, it's fascinating, and I mean, there's so many directions we could take that. But I love that you look at things that way, and that it's good to have a different opinion, right? And if it's good to disagree, and if we can, as individuals, as humans, be open and connect and communicate those things, then we can learn from each other. And it doesn't have to be this like my way is right or wrong. It's just my perception of this reality, right? So, but we'll go. So you float, right? And you have this big insight, this kind of epiphany of you're now able to observe your thinking, right? So you become aware of your thoughts, which is foundational in meditation, right? That's probably that's it, right? For me, I started meditating in college, and I was after quieting my mind. It wasn't until a lot later that I read something, I heard something I don't know, where I realized it wasn't about necessarily quieting my mind. It's about accepting your thoughts. It's about seeing them and then being able to pull yourself back, right? You're aware, you're not judging, you're non-judgment, non-attachment to these things. This is our conditioning, right? And it's not right or wrong. It just is just what happens, right? But from floating, did you then start to integrate a daily meditation process? Are you journaling? Because you said 30. Yeah. So where did that shift to? So now you're 39. You float. You have this epiphany, this aha moment. Then how did you make the next steps?
I started reading about meditation. I remember finding tons of, because I hadn't read, like I said, for 27 years, other than the mandatory reading you did in high school, things like that. I didn't really know the significance of reading. And now I'm obsessive reader, trying to play catch up at some level. I'm reading a book a week. I read every single day, and I love it. So it started to lead me down the avenues of like, well, what's at the root of this experience? Why was mine so profound? Because I was even having out-of-body experiences, having all kinds of interesting phenomena happen, which a lot of people have had through history, and they still do today. And, you start to think that you're tapping into these morphic fields or these higher intelligence. And so to me, it's like, well, I can do that all day long and navel gaze and meditate, but what is the reason for it? Where does it come from? Who's been practicing this in the past, and what did they get from it? What were the downsides of it? What were the upsides from it? You know, I don't want to make the same old mistakes. I want to make better new mistakes. Because it's real easy to get lost in the clouds in meditation and to start thinking that that's the answer. And I even came to start to realize now that in the East, they took this meditation practice all the way, right, to the extreme, sitting on hills for 25, 30 years, and some in caves, and some practicing certain breathwork techniques. And all that taught a lot about the inner world of subjectivity and existentialism and like spiritualism when it comes from like Buddhism and Taoism and all that. Well, in the West, we took the opposite approach and we externalized the world, and we didn't meditate and we didn't do self-reflection. It was all about growth and, you know, success, and it was all gas pedal, no brake. Over here, it was all brake and no gas pedal. People were starving in the streets, while these Indian mystics were sitting on hills, and we got a lot of good from that too, just like we have satellites and rockets and technology from the gas pedal. So I started to realize that what I wanted to find was the middle ground, balance. And like, how do I have a self-reflective practice, a daily practice, with my boots on the ground and still of service? And so that's where I've come with my life, is to go, okay, how do I reflect, but not think that that's the answer, is to just, you know, be in a monastery for the next 30 years for myself.
Right.
For someone that might work, and that's not wrong. But then you have like an Elon Musk who's just working 90 hours a week, and he's trying to plug his brain into the hard drive and fly to Mars.
Yeah.
And I think there's somewhere in between for myself. It's like, all right, so I've taken on a bunch of daily practices. Every morning I throw my mat down and I do Wim Hof's breathing technique for the last 5 years. I think that's worked good for me because it's practical and useful.
Do you follow it to a T? Do you do like 3 rounds, 30?
I do like 3 to 4 rounds, usually 4 now,
Yep.
35 breaths to 40 breaths, sometimes 50.
Have you played around with different tempos of the in and out? Or is there a sweet spot?
I find a sweet spot, but I've definitely played around, and I've listened to many other teachers now with breathing, and I don't get too dogmatic about it. His just seems to work for my morning practice.
Yeah.
But then sometimes, like today, around 10 a.m., I had a nice little breath work practice that was more of a breath of fire, like a seesaw breathing. And I was doing that with some movement in the sunshine, and it just felt right.
Yeah.
So I'm very, now at this point in my life, we've been talking about belief systems and narratives, and I'm big on flow and just listening to my body and trying not to get too rigid with my practices.
Yeah.
And to just go with what I feel in the moment. And so a lot of times I go in the backyard with zero plan as to what I'm going to do for my fitness or my movement or my practice. And I try to drop in with my breathing, get a rhythm down, just like tuning a guitar, and then you play.
Yeah.
And then it just falls into all kinds of animal movement and kettlebells and maces. And, you know, I'm getting less rigid, because I grew up probably like you did, where I'm bench pressing and squatting and trying to gain weight, and I had certain muscle groups, and none of that's bad. I just don't think it works for me. I want to be more functionally, fluidly fit for service, and so I can live a healthy life.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love it, right? Because I think, so I try to play with my breath. That's the way I think about it, because I'm not a rigid person by nature. But when you're teaching people, there's a reason, right? Typically, you have to have principles and a foundation.
Totally.
And then the key is, after somebody establishes some type of breath awareness, I think that they play with it, establish a relationship with it. And even back to training, it's interesting for me personally, because I've kind of done like a 180 from almost all movement, all flow, more of a dance capoeira style, to back to traditional lifting with a different perspective. And I look at building strength, I look at, you know, setting some goals. It's interesting how when it doesn't have an aesthetic, it's not rooted in just how you look. For me, it's now how capable I am. And the spots of dealing with uncomfortable, right, or when things are hard, there's a lot there. And I find that now when I'm training, it's like if I'm doing a heavy squat, it's like accepting that it's hard and embracing that as an opportunity to grow. And I think you could do that in anything, right? Even breathing becomes this, you sit down and maybe you're really distracted. Well, there's the hurdle that you can now overcome in that moment. In that moment, you're distracted, so there's this opportunity to tap in a little bit more without being judgmental, without
Love it.
Yeah.
It's showing a lot of that discipline principle being the freedom, or it's that component that you seem to have a lot of more than others.
Yeah, and I think that's Shoshin. I think that's the beginner's mind. I think there's so much correlation there to almost anything that recently I've really been able. I'd love to get your insight on this, but so for example, I started running. I hated running years ago. Running now for me is meditative. It's connecting to my breath. I'll superventilate, get into it, find a rhythm, and then it's typically all nasal, where I'm just trying to find a flow, find a rhythm. And I'll go periods where I might run a couple miles and I'm like, where did I go? Type. I listen to the most peaceful music, where when I was 20 it was like Megadeth and Pantera and right? Now no lyrics. I don't want lyrics, because the lyrics distract me from my going inward. And I find myself, so I'll give you an example. So I ran like 10 miles the other day, and I ran about halfway, about 5, and I got to this park and I stopped, and I was just felt great, and I was breathing and I was looking at the sunset, and then I had to run back, and I found myself, my thought process was, damn, I've got 5 miles to go, and I started to kind of rush, like I need to get home to do things. But in that moment, I was able to observe that and say, like, okay, that's the hurdle that's presenting itself right now, is why am I rushing to get home? Why not tap into this moment and this opportunity to breathe and be grateful for this opportunity? So that hurdle is something that I now embrace. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And that could be, it could be anything. It could be a conversation with somebody that you don't resonate with. It could be, right? Like I try to look at things as opportunities to grow.
Yeah.
So I mean,
absolutely. Everything that we do is probably a new opportunity if you're looking at it the way you're looking at it, which I try to do too. And it's like, oh, this is the great lesson for the day.
Right.
Not getting frustrated that your house guests left oil in the pan, and that would normally cause this old, immature, emotional response that makes you then act out and get frustrated. It's like, no, that person didn't do that. Why did I take that personal?
Right.
And that seems like a silly, trivial thing to pay attention to, but it was just something that I'm like, oh, I'm bringing more awareness into my everyday experience. And running is like that, or going to work and somebody does something silly and it's a pattern that's thrown off, and how frustrated did I get on the way to work? And I think that's what life seems to be, is to bring more awareness to it, and to not get all angry about it or judgmental about it, but to just enjoy the fact that you're even aware of it at all in the first place.
Why do you think you and I can embrace that, and a lot of people have a hard time with it? Do you think it's not for everyone? Do you think people are so conditioned? Right? Like there's a lot of people that you would bring these things up and it's silly, like they're Western, go, I'm here to make money, I'm here to be successful.
And I don't know that it's correct. One of the things I like to remind myself of is that my way of thinking silly.
Yeah.
And I'm happening to have an experience where my brain works like this right now, and it seems to be working well, so I try to cultivate habits and principles that work for me, because my nature is like that, and it works for me.
Right.
Somebody else, like if I was to try to teach some CEO of like a Jeff Bezos, if I was to go to him and say, hey man, you should really take a nap at 1 and maybe get some sunshine and some movement, and he might just tell me to get the fuck out of his office and say you're crazy and silly and you're wasting your time and you're lazy and you're not doing enough, and you could go down the scale. So it's incomparable. I try myself to look at the human experience as going to the zoo, and you look at animals non-judgmentally. You just look at animals and go, well, they're all interesting.
Yeah.
You're not like, that animal doesn't act like that animal. And so that helps me to then take the stress off of like that question, because it is interesting and it is a phenomena. And that it would probably be helpful if more people were bringing more awareness to their lives. And it probably is for many, because that's why like John Zen's programs, they're like stress reduction, mindfulness-based programs. They work. Right. And floating works, and meditation works. But, so does, the gas pedal run a company. So I don't know. And it is an interesting question. A lot of my patients that I run on at work are mentally ill. And I think when you look at like mental illness and mental health, which you're lucky to have decent mental health, that's why you're able to sit here and have a conversation. A lot of it's luck. You came out of a birth canal with probably parents that maybe didn't beat the shit out of you, and then you didn't have drugs in the womb. And so you can look at all the things that make you who you are, and you go, wow, I'm lucky. Thank you. That's another gratitude piece, which then allows you to feel good and serve. Versus someone who maybe is just in a chaotic state because of all those variables going wrong, and your brain goes through so much in that first 8 years, it's hard to then rewire it later.
Right.
So trauma is a huge factor.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have more than others, and so that brings us to the point of like, all right, how do I have more patience and more awareness around that? And then maybe I'm a little more kind to that person that doesn't have the capacity to manage much. They're just trying to get a big gulp for the day and trying to get through their life without too much emotion and too much stress. So to me, I'm like, all right, I'm lucky. And that's that taking account for, I don't know why people don't think like me, but I can see a lot of it's opportunity and just bad luck.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
A lot of people get mad at me when I say luck, because they're like, you deserve that or you earned that. And it's like, fuck, man, I haven't done much. I had good parents. I was adopted at a young age. My parents were awesome. They loved me. So from an early age, I took on gratitude and awareness around, like, my sister had a hard time with her adoption. She had a victim narrative that I don't know where that comes from either. It's a very big mystery. But that showed a lot of negative emotion and resentment and turmoil through those younger years, which then leads to more chaos.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I was grateful and lucky and aware that I had cool parents, and I could have been aborted or raised by, somebody really chaotic, or who knows. And that just leads into the next thing through life. So I think of it as just fucking sheer luck. And the more gratitude I bring to it, the more I can be humble and not judgmental or wishing people were a different way. Hopefully I'm articulating that correctly.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. I think so often we have this ego, this idea that we earned everything we have. And there's some truth in that, I think, right? Like you were fortunate, you luck, whatever you want to say, but you still made choices to move a direction, right?
Sure.
I think it's nature nurture is this interwoven pull push weird combination that when you take genetics and genes and these things and you throw in an environment, it's probably impossible to predict. But when you have you have empathy, and I think when you look at it from that perspective, there is a lot of luck involved. There's it's the same for me. Fortunate to have good parents, and I a lot of positive people around me as I was coming up, and who knows what I would have ended up like if the situation and environment would have been different. But I see that all the time. I can have empathy for almost anyone because the environment and our experiences do so much to shape who we are as individuals, right? That even our DNA is expressed differently depending on the environment, right? And all the different signaling that we're exposed to.
Totally.
What does a day in the life look like for you when you're working? Are you working a couple weeks at a time?
We do 24 hours on, 48 off, so 1 on, 2 off.
Yep.
A lot of departments do a variation similar to that, a little different, but I get up early. I get up at 5 a.m., sometimes a little earlier.
When you're even if you're at the station?
If I'm going to work tomorrow, I'll get up at 5 a.m., and I do my breathing practice, a little bit of movement, mobility in the morning. Then I make a cup of coffee, and I usually drink a big glass of water, and I do some reading for about 30 minutes. I always walk my dog just to give her a nice walk, and I do my walk with a lot of nasal breathing, and I like to drop into a mindfulness practice for my walk, and just part of my habit. And then I usually leave to work around 7:15. I get to work 7:30, and what I like to do is I have a lot of habits that are in place, and most guys do, just to keep things from being missed that are so important. If you set your day up right, it's going to go good. If you don't check off all your equipment, it's probably not going to go so well when you need that one piece of equipment. It could be life or death, actually. So I check off my breathing apparatus. So you go right to the breath, and then you put your stuff on the truck, but I go right to my bottle, make sure that air pack is working. It's got the right amount of air, the alarms on it work. Check off your pack, check off your equipment, check off the whole fire truck. Takes a good 30, 40 minutes if you do it correctly and do it, well. And I'm a paramedic too, so I check off my drug box, make sure all the drugs in there are of date and they're all in there, and all my equipment that I might need. And from there, everybody usually helps out and cleans the station. One of the trucks at my station, we have 2 trucks. Some stations have 3 trucks, 4 trucks. It just depends on the station. And we choose who's going to cook for the day. Everybody drops a little money. We go shop for chow. That's usually around 10 a.m. Get a midday workout as a group or as an individual. It just depends on the station dynamic. At my station, we got a lot of young, interesting guys that like to get together, and so we do group workouts, which is fun.
You guys have like a little gym there?
We have a great gym there. I brought all my rings in there and a lot of
cool.
stuff, kettlebells, all the fun stuff. So it's nice, and we have a parking garage next door that we can run, and we can put our gear on and do skills courses, which is some good hard work too. And so there's a lot of cool camaraderie at work. Actually, that's been a cool part of my life, where you get that tap into that old primitive, tribalism of cooking together, eating together, laughing, telling stories. I mean, that's one of the great parts of our culture, is eating together.
Yeah.
I love it. And that's another one of those practices where I can go a few days without bringing awareness to my job and how fucking lucky I am. And to work for an organization, a big business that's to help people, and the worst day of your life can happen, and you can call 911, and you can in 4 minutes have a bunch of guys that are trained with tools and equipment, and they can manage your nightmare. And we can work as a team, and we can do it very efficiently and effectively, and it's actually quite a miracle.
Right.
In a big, huge city with millions of people, that you can get that kind of organizational structure and infrastructure, and fuck, it's cool.
And that probably comes back to one of the things you said earlier with West East, like, not saying that they don't have those systems in the East, but how we run ourselves as a society, although it does have drawbacks, that's probably an example of one of the beautiful things, right? Of the organization of that, and the training and how that works.
Right. Yep. Yeah, it's really cool, man. The infrastructure is so cool when you think about being able to call a phone number and they manage it.
Right.
And,
what's some of maybe the craziest experiences you've had? I mean, can you share, like, been in like a crazy fire? I mean, have you had any close calls? Like,
yeah, I mean, over the years you start to change your gauge on what you think is a crazy call, and it depends on who you're talking to as far as who thinks what's crazy. I think some of the crazier stuff is some of the petty, weird stuff that people call you for, that you wouldn't imagine people would call 911 for.
Right.
But yeah, I've had some interesting fires over the years. We live in an old city, and so over time you start to get this building that we're sitting in. If this was a big structure fire, it's going to get weird. Yeah. And it's a big rat race in here, in a maze. So to find your way through a building like this and to put it out, it's a dangerous building. Yeah, but I think the harder calls are the pediatric codes, the kids that suffer, and going into people's houses day in and day out and seeing how people live and the mental health issues that people have, and learning how to cope with that over the years has been something that I've learned to do decently. I'm still learning, but mental health for myself to stay fit for service is huge. But we get exposed to a lot of weird stuff, a lot of death, a lot of suffering. You see people that are, quadriplegics laying in beds, and they don't really have a lot of caretaking happening. Or you see the death process as you get older a lot. We go on a lot of older people that are suffering and they can't get around, or they fall and break their hip, or they're sitting in their own feces. There's a lot of terrible, terrible suffering happening throughout the world all the time that most people aren't seeing. Yeah. And so I get a high exposure to that as a first responder, and I'd say that definitely changes who you are. And it can harden you, and it can make you feel less empathetic if you're not careful and you don't start to build practices that are helpful to have a good, strong narrative that's useful and that works. So I've been lucky to use different tools and techniques to build narratives about who I am and what I do and why those people are suffering and why did I get to see that or be a part of that experience. And I think of it as another opportunity to be grateful that I have the brain and the body and the mind that can actually show up to an organization, put my stuff on the truck, and they train me and allow me the opportunity to show up to people's worst day, and that I'm calm and able to serve. That's a freaking opportunity and a gift, because a lot of people might not be able to handle those types of calls.
Right.
You know, just like a trauma surgeon, I couldn't do that job, but
Right.
thank God for that guy.
Yeah.
So I look at it like every day, I'm going in these people's homes, and thank God for that, because my brain does work well when I'm in chaotic scenes.
Right.
And it's contagious too, so I've learned to slow your breathing down and down-regulate your nervous system and try to perform so that you keep everyone else calm too, because that's contagious. And if I'm chaotic, that's contagious as well. So, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know which ones are the most crazy. I could go into stories, but they're all crazy in their own weird way.
Right.
A lot of car accidents, a lot of terrible, interesting things that stick, you know?
So when you say control the narrative, right? I think that's what you said. Well, I hear that. I hear that you're able to, so you understand that your thoughts, you get to dictate the direction your thoughts go.
Right.
And your thoughts become your reality, right? So for you, dealing with all of this, that seeing trauma and seeing these hard situations, you look at it like I can spin that and flip it in a way that I'm here to help these people. So that's the narrative you create that allows you to do it without being pulled down.
Totally.
Right? Yep.
And you would imagine that the opposite narrative, or a narrative that wouldn't be healthy, would be one that's like, why did I have to see that 3-year-old get backed over by her mother today?
Right.
Why was I there?
Right.
Why me? You know, why is this happening to me? Instead of, how lucky am I that in the city, someone right now is probably having a really hard time, and someone else is going to show up to that scene, and hopefully it's someone that's equipped and desires to do that job. And if someone were to be suffering in this building, it's not like I'm off duty, so I'm not going to help. I am excited to get involved and help.
Yeah.
And so I try to think of it as not victimhood, that narrative, but opportunity and gratitude. And that is a shift in my state, which then changes the way that I feel about my relationship to my job, myself, and even to that person that was suffering. And hopefully I could have made that person's life a little better in that moment, or even been a good example maybe to the other medic or the other firefighter as to how I managed it as well. Or there's always a way to find opportunity. And, you know, maybe that was stuff I was doing unconsciously early on in my career, but now I'm just starting to see it a little bit more broadly, and I'm trying to build narratives that are more truthful, more strong, and more healthy.
Yeah, no, I love it, right? Because, I mean, it's if our thoughts become our reality, you might as well create a good one, right? I mean, an exciting one. And if control over our consciousness is what dictates our quality of life, which I think I believe. Totally. Then how we perceive a situation and managing the narrative that we create plays into our happiness, our how we experience reality, right? I think that's so important for people to hear and realize, and probably take a step back and actually think about that, right? Like, you know, I don't think a lot of people actually take time to realize that you and I could experience the same thing, and we could walk away with two completely different narratives, two different experiences based off what we're thinking. Yeah. And it's cool to hear you say you choose to look at it a certain way when you're dealing with a lot of crap, but you also are what you do, being grateful for what you do as a man of service. Like, it's cool to hear you be able to have that perspective. Thank you. Because I do think that's important. And I think that, like, I read a book recently, and it was, I can't remember what it was, but I was thinking about this, but you brought up Wim Hof. And, you know, you've done that. I did the Wim Hof course. I follow his stuff. I find it really cool and really fascinating. But this book that I was reading, a guy went and lived with him, and he was talking about how, so I think he was a writer that was kind of there to debunk him too. You know, that's like what this guy does. Yeah. And he ended up like, no, I think it's the real stuff. Like, he's out there, but he's really in it for the right reasons. But So he was taking a shower at his Wim's place.
It'd be funny to try to debunk Wim Hof because he's so vibrant and raw.
You're right.
You'd immediately it would shift you, but that's cool.
Yeah,
Keep
I mean,
going. It'd be like
more
hard.
of like this science, and I mean, there's some really good science there, but I think he's super eccentric,
right.
which is what makes him great. But so this guy he's staying with Wim at his place, right? I think this is fairly recent. Like now, Wim has like this big retreat center, but it's like it's older,
right?
And this guy busted his shower, and water starts shooting out, and it ends up flooding the floor, and it's leaking down through the floors. This is in this book, and this guy immediately starts thinking, oh, shoot, he's gonna be mad at me and all this stuff, and Wim was like dancing in it, and basically shifted the narrative to how nice it was to get a rain bath in his house, something like that, right? So there's somebody that has this ability, this amazing ability to shift a narrative where most people would freak out,
right?
And it becomes this
party.
And that's it. Like, what good does being mad do?
It's amazing.
What good does getting frustrated do? Right?
It just adds dis-ease in your body, your mind, and it probably trickles into the next interaction you have, which doesn't help it get fixed. And
right? I mean, it seems so simple to me, but
it seems simple, but so hard, right?
Yeah, I think, like you said earlier, my way is not the right way. It works for me now, and hopefully I continue to grow and evolve as a person. But if I try to force my way on other people, I'm doing the same thing as other people would be doing to me.
And it's so hard to rewire someone's brain habits really quickly without them wanting to or even knowing that it's even something they should do in the first place. An injury, you might have an injury and look at it like, oh, this is my teacher. How do I now learn about the hip mobility and change the way my gait is? And this is my teacher. And it might even give you more of a stillness practice. So you'll read books, and then you'll even find your next future best friend because you were aware that that was an opportunity instead of being in this, why me? Why am I hurt? And that's another one of those things where I'm like, how lucky are you and me to be able to even have an awareness that an injury is a teacher and not some curse.
Right.
And that's great. And I don't know why people have to have those patterns, but the fact that you have good ones just means that you can keep cultivating them and get even more strong, more resilient, more adaptable, and more of service.
Right.
And have more of an impact. And so maybe in the next go round, if there is an incarnation, we might not have it so good, and somebody else will give us a hand up and teach us a little bit by example too.
Cool way to look at it.
I don't know how that works. It's a great mystery, but I'm always like, well, it's a lot deeper and older and more interesting than I know of.
Yeah.
So.
For sure. How have your comrades, your partners at work, do most of them embrace? Are they interested in your perspective? Do you tend to be an outlier in that space? How does that work?
I think that narrative in my head I used to believe that I was an outlier. I had a belief that like, oh, this culture thinks like this, and I'm a weirdo on the outside thinking about this stuff, and they'll never understand me. When it started to happen rapidly, and I was floating and having some different experiences that were shifting my consciousness and reading stuff that was a little on the edge. And then I realized, I think from John Zinn, that book I recommended, wherever you go, there you are. If I quit the fire department because I didn't think that the culture fit me, and I went to Chile and I tried finding myself there, inside of me is all those same issues that I didn't quite get straight, and I was finding that the world outside needed to accept me instead of accepting myself and validating myself and realizing that, I don't need people to understand or accept me. I just need to learn how to try to connect to these people and truly try to understand them. And I've found over the years actually that I'm thankful that I started to shift that perspective and realize that most guys are very open. And even if it's not at the dinner table that we're talking about consciousness or mindfulness or any of this edgy stuff, everyone's interested in it because it's we're all human and we're all very confused and we're all uncertain about the nature of what's happening. I mean, anyone can say they know what's happening, but no one has a clue how to live and what's going on here.
Right.
So the truth of the matter is that no one has a clue how to live, what's going on. And so that's humbling to me. Then I don't think that my thought patterns are that weird anyway. They're probably things that everyone thinks about, but maybe never put that much energy or attention to.
Right.
And we're all passionate about different things, and my passion seems to lie in understanding the nature of how we think and probing into weird worlds. But I've found a lot of cool friends from having conversations about some of this stuff too.
Yeah.
And then some people might be turned off by it, and that's great. You know, we don't have to have that conversation. I don't like talking to people that don't want to hear me think anyway. If you weren't interested in what I had to say, we wouldn't be talking.
Right.
I wouldn't. I can be
I
can sit silent for hours.
Yeah.
And I like doing that.
Yeah.
But if someone's interested and I want to hear them think and they want to hear me think, of course we can do this for fucking ever.
Right.
So I'm not forcing it down anyone's throat, and I don't need acceptance from anyone. But I also have found a lot of good acceptance, and I've even had tons of guys come over to my home, and you'd hear things that they've probably never told anyone. So It's been a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I love it, man. Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to you can't change anyone. You can change yourself.
Yep.
Right. I think that's a pretty good principle, right?
It's a great
it's
principle.
not about if you're not happy now, you're probably not going to be happy anywhere else, or you're not happy here, right? It's all you need to be happy now here with yourself so that you can be happy other places.
Yep.
What are some? So I was thinking about some of the books. Like we talked about the book that you shared with me that I loved, that I recently finished. One of probably the first books I read. Well, I read Bruce Lee way back in college, and that pulled me into this. I didn't know what I was reading, but he's a philosopher as well as a martial artist. But then I read Miracle of Mindfulness, which is I'm gonna totally butcher his name. You probably know the guy, but I always say it's like TikTok. Like it's horrible to say.
Oh, is he a Vietnamese guy?
Yeah.
I think it's like Thich Nhat Hanh.
There you go. That's
Thich Nhat Hanh. People say it different ways, but I used to say Thich Nhat Hanh, and I don't think it's pronounced like that. But I love that man.
Really simple. Miracle of Mindfulness. But what are some things that some of the most influential books that you've read?
So many. I have to say Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That was huge.
I haven't read that.
Someday you might. I don't like to recommend books because everyone's seeking different things.
Right.
But it's a guy, Viktor Frankl. He ends up being a psychotherapist. Lives through the Holocaust, loses his whole family, and goes through the details of it. And he wrote this beautiful book. And it's an existentialism book. It's a stoicism book. And it's how to find meaning in hell, basically.
Right.
And he did, and that was an amazing book. And if I'm having a fucked up day, or I think I'm having a bad day, geez, just for a moment I can think of him and those words that ripple through time. And I love reading Stoicism. I love Marcus Aurelius. I like Seneca's Letters of a Stoic. They're very practical, useful. How do I live a good life? Not this abstract, I love thinking abstract and reading abstract, but I like the foundational, like, all right, how do I take something that someone could use for 1,000 years? What can I learn that would be useful 100 years from now and 5,000 years ago?
Right.
And those are the deep truths about the nature of being human. I loved Will Durant's The Story of Philosophy. He's a historian. Him and his wife wrote a cool history book. It was actually a whole series of history books, but he wrote a cool book, and he's an epistemologist, so he looks at human beings and how we've thought over a long period of time and the different paradigms of thinking throughout time and why those paradigms existed and how and why people thought differently during those times based on what the environment looked like. So those are cool books to me. Is like just looking at how we developed, our consciousness developed over time. I really loved Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna. It's an evolutionary theory book by a guy who was way on the edge, thinking that psilocybin mushrooms were the reason that the human brain size possibly doubled in the period of 200,000 years or so.
Yeah.
And that, apes started to experiment with different foods in the environment. They came out of the trees and onto the grasslands, and so they ate mushrooms, and that revolutionized the way that they thought. And those are interesting to me because it is fascinating to me why, when you engage with something like a plant, like a fungi, it would radically shift perception so drastically, and why it makes you feel like time and space exist so differently, and yet you feel connected to everything all at once. And those are huge mysteries to me, and I can't see why people aren't still ranting in the streets about it to this day. And people are, but there's a lot of science now behind these things, and there's a lot of people studying these subjects, and they're finding a lot of useful benefit from using these plants as tools. So I think there's probably a giant disconnect that we have with these plants, and there's probably something missing from our diet that we used for thousands of years in every single culture throughout all of time. So plant medicines are incredibly interesting to me, and I like reading about, if you come to my house and you look at my library, I have stuff from all fields of interest, but there's a lot on consciousness. And I'd say those are some of the top books that I've loved to read, but there's so many more too, just depending on what subject matter influences me the most.
Yeah.
But yeah, Letters of a Stoic by Seneca I can hand to anybody, and they can get something beneficial right now from it. So not everyone's going to want to read Robert Anton Wilson. You know, he's a very abstract thinker, and I find myself reading things that maybe only 5,000 people have ever read, and that's just because I'm interested in it.
When you read something like that, you find it takes, like, you have to really go slow. Like, it's so, there's so much to it that...
Totally, like a Nietzsche or Robert Anton Wilson. He writes something in a page that some people probably couldn't put in a book.
Right.
And he's talking about... But for me, it's very interesting, too, so it would be harder for me to read something I wasn't interested in, because you have to find what you love. You know, it's like playing music is fun if you like playing music, but it's going to suck for someone that may not like to play music.
Yeah.
So it would be a task for someone, and it might be enjoyable for another. For me, reading stuff about consciousness is so easy.
Yeah.
And it's fun, and I can see that these people have already just found a way to put language to something I've experienced maybe in a float tank or in another experience, and I'm going, oh, wow, Robert or Timothy Leary or McKenna or one of these guys put language to this better than anyone has done. So they're poets, and... You know.
Do you read one book at a time, or do you read multiple?
I sort of read one at a time. Sometimes I'll have two going, one at work, one at home.
Yep.
And it just depends on the book. Sometimes I'll pick up a book, you know, something like you said, Thich Nhat Hanh, or some sort of Buddhist philosophy. I can pick that up in the morning every day and read a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But then I'm in the middle of like a really good long book.
Where you need to
so it just depends.
stay with it. Yeah.
But I like to sort of just finish books.
Yeah.
I don't like too many going at once, just personally.
Something I wanted to ask you, because I thought about this earlier, and I'll change the subject a little bit, but not really, because it's all the same topic, right? So recent experience I had, I've been working on this sleeve, and I'm getting this done traditional Japanese, so it's by hand. But it had been a while since I had tattooing, and I was able to get into the deepest meditation I've probably ever achieved. Where I was like walking into worlds like these, this purple world opened up, and I could almost walk into it. It's like I could, and I've read people describe deep meditation, like there's these kind of wild journeys and realms.
Yeah.
I find that the pain from the tattooing facilitates some of that, because I'm so focused on my breath that I get super, super deep. I was curious if you've, because I know you have the tattooing, did you experience any of that? Was that done earlier?
I had a lot of this done before I started having those experiences, but I've had a lot of rework done, and I've started to really enjoy body work like that, because same thing, it's another interesting meditation with pain.
Body work specifically to tattoos.
Tattooing, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's pretty powerful, especially after that third and fourth hour when your endorphins wear off and now you're actually dealing with real pain.
Right.
It's interesting where your mind can go and what
so
you can get
I had
to.
a guy, and I don't know the science on this, but a guy say that there's a good chance that natural DMT was released.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that? Is that possible? That
well, when you said the realms, that was immediately where I went to. Is Breathwork does it, right? What is the pineal gland? We just don't know. And is DMT produced by the pineal gland? Is that what they thought of as the third eye in the ancient cultures? Right. And there's a lot of studies. Rick Strassman's like the head guy who studies DMT, and I've listened to him speak live a couple times because I'm fascinated by his work.
Did he write this?
The Spirit Molecule and a few others.
Yep.
Did a bunch of studies on DMT and still I think does.
Did you read that book?
Yeah.
I have it.
Fascinating.
But I haven't read it.
it's worth a dabble. Or just what I like to do if I don't want to get to a book is listen to him speak for an hour.
Yeah.
To get his cliff notes of his life's work through conversation to see if it interests you to go further.
Yeah.
But DMT being produced while you dream, possibly, when you do breath work, when you're in pain, possibly, different ways of accessing it. What is it? It is interesting. And I had a profound experience in the Amazon jungle with that particular compound from an old Amazonian tree, I think. No, it was actually up in the Andes where this tree exists, and it was done through a guy who had been working with this for 50 years, but it's called Vilca, and it stands for the sacred, and it's a 45-minute dimethyltryptamine compound, and it was done in a religious context, and it was done in a set and setting that were perfect for that, and it's not something that, I probably ever expected to do. But anyway, that experience of entering into a realm, and that's exactly what you did, is you leave your body and you enter into a realm, and you feel actually the most deja vu you've ever felt in your life. Like if you were to experience a little deja vu, a little hint of it, even right now, amplify that times 1,000, and you're basically going, oh my God, I've been here before. And you feel comfortable here, and you felt welcomed, and you could communicate with not entities, but I don't know what was going on there, but it felt very...
Well, what was that? Yeah, can you break that down? Like, what happened? What was your experience? Like, did you interact with something like an entity when you say that, or was it you just felt really connected to nature?
So try to put this into language is almost impossible. And I remember when I was up there, as if I were to say it, I remembered I'm like down there as well in this flesh vehicle. But also knowing that I'm having this experience, and it's just as tangible. It felt just as real as you and I having this conversation. But it wasn't like I was in an avatar up there in a body and having a linguistic experience. It was more of like an energetic exchange, as in vibration and frequency. And so I could communicate, like, what is fear? And almost like the walls would giggle, and you would get this laughter of like hysteria. There is no fear in this realm. It's only a human experience. It's like, oh, what? I'm even trying to conceive of this word fear, or this idea of fear, to translate it and to see what it means, but it doesn't exist up here in this other realm. What do you do down there? And it's like, well, it sort of turned up the vibrational capacity of my experience. So it sort of amplified the experience, which just meant raise your vibration. Keep a healthy vibration, and that's sort of like a healthy cell in an organism that ripples. If I'm in an unhealthy, toxic state while I'm in the human experience, I'm probably having a negative experience on other people. I'm impacting them in a negative way. So it was about amplifying vibration. And then I remember seeing like hieroglyphic old stones that were very translucent and green, and the whole thing was very translucent, but I could see hieroglyphs. And it was like they were blasting me with information, and it was almost like I was understanding and downloading it. And it was interesting. It's almost like, what is that?
Yeah, it's fascinating, for sure.
Yeah, I'm not the only one that's had that experience. Right. The guy, Don Howard, who I worked with, he had probably done that over 100 times in 50 years, and very different experiences each time, but very tangible, real, interesting experiences. And cultures have done this for thousands of years. And so it's just fascinating.
How did you meet him? Was he the one that got you there?
I ended up meeting him. I was interested in plant medicine for about 7 years, that particular ayahuasca and wachuma and the ones that he held down in the jungle. But I didn't know where I'd do it, and I sort of set my intention and said, hey, if I'm ever meant to do that, I'll do it when it's right. And I found an interview with him and Amber Lyon. She's an ex-CNN reporter who was on Joe Rogan and never had any psychedelic experiences in her life. She goes off, quits CNN, and goes down there and meets Don Howard, and comes back a year later and does an interview with him. And that interview resonated so deeply. I could just see that Don Howard had this really beautiful way of describing this particular experience in the jungle in a way that I hadn't heard yet. So I felt comfortable with this guy, and I started doing a little research and ended up going down there. And I went to his last ceremony after 25 years of his operation because he was dying of cancer, a rare blood disorder.
Yeah.
And while I was there, he said the only place in the world that needed treatment was the Mayo Clinic, of all places. And I live in Arizona, so I offered to help, and he ended up living on my couch 4 months later with his family. And I moved into my guest house, and I became his caretaker and friend, and he became like a father and a really beautiful mentor, and I got to learn a lot from him. But it's weird how that kind of stuff works out.
Yeah.
But that's another one of those weird things too, where I couldn't have had that opportunity to serve him and to have those experiences if I wasn't present to the opportunity that was there. It's just perfect timing. Everything always seems to be. And my curiosity level and interest in that particular, it's just interesting. You just follow your curiosity and wonder, and next thing you know, you're meeting interesting people and learning different things and finding yourself serving in ways you didn't know existed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have to be open to that possibility, right?
Yeah.
How do you so you'd mentioned, we talked a little about like kind of your bio, but Shoshin, right? Beginner's mind. Am I saying Shoshin? Am I pronouncing it right?
I think so.
Okay.
Or Shoshin.
Shoshin.
I've heard like Ido Portal, who you tipped me off on. He actually brought that word into my consciousness.
Yeah.
So.
How do you embody that? How do you embrace that in your life day to day? How would you, so to maintain a beginner's mind,
right?
To have almost a childlike view of things. How do you have to be very intentional, and you set your intention on that? How, maybe an example of how you would embrace that as a human, as a man, as a firefighter, as all of these things.
Yeah, it's almost not as much of a rational, you want to cultivate it as a habit when you bring awareness to, am I walking into this experience and being open right now, or am I already having all these preconceived beliefs and I'm sort of shut off to the experience happening? But I almost feel like it's a state, just like gratitude's not exactly a word as much as it is a physiological state, but we can use maps to get to the experience. Does that make sense? So Shoshin is a territory, it's a landscape, it's a feeling, and it's a base for an orientation towards how I'm gonna perceive reality. But I would imagine it's not getting locked on the map the whole time. Like, I need to be a beginner's mind right now. I need to be in this state. It's like, no, it's actually something that you cultivate in your field, in your energy, and how you approach things. And then you feel a certain way, but you can use little maps and little tools to get you there each time. So like even driving to come see you today, I didn't know what to expect. So I wasn't getting obsessive over that with my rational mind, but I just dropped into a state of like, try to communicate with Brandon today from your heart and be open and try to learn something new. And no matter what, you're going to have a fun time because he's an interesting guy. And I've never really done a podcast, so let's see how that goes. It'll be a good experience. So it's almost like you drop into a state. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. It's hard to communicate
It's hard to communicate that.
I've struggled with that.
And Don Howard always just tap you here.
Yeah. Because
we're always here, and this is beautiful. I love my brain. But how do we drop into a place of here? Because our hearts are very intelligent and wise. And
breath.
There's a feeling inside of it. And so it's an energetic shift.
Yeah.
And then that gives you the ability to be more present, which then allows you to be more open and to have that experience.
Yeah. I love that.
And that's just what I'm working on. I'm not good at it, but.
Well, let's I think we're going to have to do a part 2 because, man, we can talk.
Yeah.
It just makes me realize, man, I want to spend more time with you as a human, man.
We've always said that. And we're just busy humans, but we know we enjoy each other's company. So
I did want to do this with you. So I thought it would be interesting because I wrote down just a couple of quotes that I really enjoy, and I wanted just to get your perspective. Like, what does it make you think of? As just a little kind of thought experiment.
Cool.
Right? So this first quote, and I have these on my refrigerator. This is how I'm these little sticky notes. I put them up there, and it's just a way for me to set my intention. Like I go to the fridge, I drink water in the morning, I remind myself. And one of the first ones I ever wrote, and this comes from Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. It is wisdom which is seeking for wisdom. When you hear that, what do you think of? Like, how do you interpret that? Those words, how would you, what I'm getting at? It is wisdom which is seeking for wisdom.
That's interesting. I like that. Wisdom is seeking wisdom. Well, don't know why my mind would go to the idea of wisdom as being older, more intuitive, more. It's outside of this rational place that we exist in the West. And I would think that if you look at that infinite and finite games theory, that we're playing an infinite game. And I think the more we can focus on that, we're more focused on what can I learn while I'm here that would be most useful 10,000 years from now. And that deep buildup of wisdom over time might then try to keep seeking more and more of itself, which is the more foundational stuff that makes us more successful and more impactful and more alive as a human being. If we're bringing it into the human context, of course.
Yeah.
But I imagine wisdom is what we're seeking if we truly believe that this is an infinite journey. If it's a finite journey, you might be seeking less wisdom and more just temporary ways to play the game. And then it's over at the end and you're dead. And so, personally, I think the people that play the infinite game, which is probably where that came from, which is the Beginner's Mind book, he thinks long term, he thinks there's reincarnated energy. And that's what I think wisdom is like continually seeking what is the most useful thing you could know and pass on, maybe even to children or, so hopefully that answers your question.
No, there's no wrong or right with this.
Yeah.
I
what do you think about it? Like, you have it on your fridge, so you're seeing it every day.
I agree with what you said. I tend to think of it as long as you're pursuing growth and you're embodying growth as a way of living, which to me is that's the child's mind. Everything it's new, it's exciting. That's wisdom. Searching, being curious, that's wisdom itself. And
right.
So there is no finish line there. That's the long game, the infinite. You're never going to be wise. Right. Because you're constantly searching.
Love that.
Yeah. That's how and I think we're on the same page. I don't know who said this when I read it somewhere, but I got this big old gray beard and turned 40 this year. I feel young. I feel good, right? But this one is the older I get, the more I look like myself. I wish I knew where I read that. But
I like that.
Yeah. What does that make you think of?
I would say that the older we get, the more we can actually see ourselves beyond the avatar.
Right.
I mean, the gray beard's a beautiful reflection of embracing your wisdom and your aging process, which I think we should all do. Right. But we start to see who you actually are beyond the veil, beyond the curtain, beyond the avatar, and like, oh, I see you. Yeah. And the more you can see you, the more you can see me. Yep. Because I'm a reflection of you, and we're all conscious beings, and we're not separate. So it's like, oh, if you can't see yourself, and you're more judgmental on the superficial level, you're going to see yourself in that way. But the older you get, the more wise you get, the more you see, like, oh, I'm actually a loving, beautiful, interesting time traveler. Yeah. There you go. So, what do you think? Tell me your quote.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, I think it's, again, kind of understanding. I look at it like unraveling or understanding the ego one breath at a time. And hopefully the older we get, the more we're comfortable in our own skin. Cool. Right. Yeah. Rather than trying to be something that society tells us we should be. I think it's the insecurity, these things that we are conditioned to believe we have to be a certain way. Hopefully we start to become more comfortable with who we are as a person. But I think that can go the other way too, right? We can grow. Some people get more egotistical, and right. That's just that's their path. But but I look at it as the older I've gotten, the more comfortable I am with who I am, and hopefully that's because I'm constantly trying to grow. Right.
Love that.
So, we'll get a couple more, and then we'll be done. I don't even know how long, JX. How long are we right now? 1:13. Okay. Okay, yeah. So we I mean, again, we could talk forever, man. But control over consciousness determines the quality of life, and we kind of talked about that a lot. But that's another one that I, for me personally, is kind of a principle that I try to understand. But how do you perceive that? How do you see that?
Control over consciousness determines the quality of your life. Control, surrender, awareness, bringing that stuff in. If you have awareness, you have the ability to choose to control what you think and how you think.
Yeah,
so
your narrative.
Yeah, that's
like
it.
You
Your
said,
narrative.
right?
You choose the story. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful. If you can do that, it's a superpower.
Yeah.
And,
That comes from the book Flow.
by that weird last name.
Yeah, he's kind of the
head of the flow
grandfather, which is a good book from almost like a sports psychology.
I have it sitting on the shelf waiting to be read, and I've listened to him speak a lot.
Yeah.
Jamie Wheel's deep into his stuff, the flow genome stuff.
Yeah.
But love it.
Yeah. Meditation is not a vacation from the irritation.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's like, what is his name? Jack Cornfield. I like him. He's really interesting. You've probably heard him over the years, but first the ecstasy, now the laundry.
Yeah.
Or, how do you deal with your colicky baby, as Jamie Wheel says, after you've just come back from the mountaintop and you've reached God and you think you're enlightened.
Yeah.
Go spend a weekend with your family, as Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened.
Yeah.
So how do you show up every day, boots on the ground? Meditation is a practice and a tool to self-regulate and to sort of become aware. But I think, it's not an escape. It's not a vacation. It's not some woo-woo thing.
Right.
It's like, how do I breathe on the way to a fire and slow down my breath?
Yeah, you still have to deal with the fire.
You still have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And you still have to manage chaos. And
Yeah.
how do I deal with my house guests that are here for 30 days and messing up your house? Am I going to be compassionate and nice and patient, or am I going to flip out? And so anyway, I think I get it. How do you relate to it? Same thing?
Same, man. There's a big shift, and hopefully these conversations help this shift, because you're a firefighter. This hopefully doesn't sound negative, but it's like machismo type. Like, people look up to you. You're a big, strong guy, but you also have this soft side, this awareness to you. Where was I going with that? I was probably, what I was trying to say is, like, there's a big group of people that still probably look at meditation as like, oh, that's just a bunch of fluff, It's not the real world. But I think that defines that. It's like, by meditating, by being mindful, it doesn't mean that shit doesn't suck.
Right.
There's a lot of crap that people have to deal with.
Yeah.
And it's not an escape from it, but it's a way to be aware of it. It's a way to cultivate a different state, right?
And relate to it.
And to relate to it different, right? I still have stuff that I have to deal with that as a person. I still have crap that I need to unravel to understand. Meditation is a tool for that, right? So that's why it's like, it's not this, I'm going to meditate and everything is now perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I like that one.
Yeah.
And it makes you more responsive instead of reactive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
instead of having your emotions drive you, it allows you to sort of be the observer and to separate yourself a little bit.
Yeah. So this is the last one. Fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to the truth.
Yeah. I think the great truths are the most uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's why we probably can avoid them as a species, individually, collectively, politically. I mean, the uncomfortable, dirty truth that's painful sometimes, but that's the only way we can fix it, is to become aware of it and to look at it and to see how and what's going on, to understand it, to then change it.
Yeah.
And you find that real quick in a meditation tank.
Yeah.
How uncomfortable it is in there and how busy our minds are. And, I feel like those are where you have to, or in a plant medicine or in a breath work or going to a new job and working with people. The truth is that the uncomfortable stuff is where you learn most.
Mm-hmm.
So
For sure.
What are you thinking about that?
100%. I agree. I can't think of this. There's a quote, another one that
even just bring it up is just reading history.
Right.
And which is being somewhat erased right now. To some degree, and the fact that we're amnesic to our history is because it's a very uncomfortable past that we came from.
Yeah.
A big, bloody, traumatic mess.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful too, because we're resilient, adaptable, but we've done a lot of horrific things, and we've been through a lot of crazy stuff, and we've made some huge mistakes. And I like looking at history and reading the dark, dirty, bloody stuff to then go, okay, that's all inside of me too. How do I make new, better mistakes?
That's beautiful, man. This is it's a Bruce Lee one, but it goes right with that. To understand your fear is the beginning of really seeing,
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think when we can if we can understand what we're afraid of and our fear, probably going way back to being a little kid, that helps us. I think that's the key to unlocking growth.
Yeah.
And it's to look at that from a place of compassion, because you're just a little kid that got thrown into this world and the environment started, right? I mean, it's not a bad thing to admit that we're afraid,
right?
That we have fear, that we have insecurity. And if you can admit that and see that and understand it, but understand it from a place of compassion for ourselves and for others, I think that facilitates growth, right?
Love it. It's good stuff.
Well, heck yeah, man. I love it, brother. I appreciate your time. I mean, you're such a insightful human, man. And it really does make me want to have more of these conversations, because you've done a lot of work and I respect that.
Thanks, bro.
Another thing I was thinking about is your sauna, your ice tub.
Mm-hmm.
Are you cool with people finding you on social media? I mean, I know it's,
Totally.
So your IG profile is
A Wonder Junkie.
A Wonder Junkie.
Yeah.
And I know you did have some stuff there, because Ryan has a really cool cold plunge.
Yeah, just got it. My friend Ryan made those things.
What's that company again?
I think it's like thecoldplunge.com,
Yeah.
but he worked for a float center. It got shut down during COVID, so they built some beautiful cold plunges.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about getting one of those myself.
They're great.
And then a new sauna, just get a sauna. So, and for people to connect, if they're interested, if they want to pick your brain and ask you questions, are you open to that? I
love that.
Probably
yeah.
IG is.
Yeah,
is that a good way?
It's an easy method. Any way through the internet,
I think you need to, at some point, firefighter still doing that, or maybe in the future you retire. You need to have maybe you need to host retreats, and you need to give people more of this insight, man.
I'll just keep following the path, and I'll know exactly what to do.
Yeah, who knows?
But
right?
yeah, I love sharing and connecting and learning. So
yeah. Well,
yeah.
Again, man, appreciate it.
Thanks
love
for having me, man. Yeah, love hanging out with you.
Higher human number 3.